The Dallas Mavericks have made a pair of signings ahead of training camp next month. Jeffrey Cooperstein and Harrison Graham here to break down those roster moves for all of you. Welcome into the show. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. Coop, we're back, and the Mavs have made a pair of signings. Let's walk through them here.
Yeah, we'll start with Joe Wieskamp, the guard out of Iowa. He was with Toronto last year. Hasn't really done much in his NBA career. He was waived by Toronto a few weeks ago after his contract guarantee date. And so he signs with the Mavs on a training camp deal, and we'll see what he can do. My guess is the Mavs did this to try to get him in the G League with the Legends to get his rights. But he's an interesting player. He hasn't done much in his NBA career thus far, but an interesting signing nonetheless.
Yeah, good shooter in college, if I remember correctly, but that is not translated to the NBA. You look at his numbers here in brief action. Obviously, he didn't play a lot of minutes, but 33% from the field, 31% from three. This feels like a guy that just needs to play in the G League to further develop. So we'll see what he's able to do. 6'6", 205, so decent length there.
He was one of those guys that felt like he was in college for 15 years at Iowa. Every single time you turn on Iowa basketball, Joe Wieskamp was there.
It was him, Bohannon, who was there for ages.
Luka Garza. They had a good run of players there. Yeah, Wieskamp's an interesting prospect. I'm not expecting much from him as far as making the actual team with the Mavericks, though.
I think the more interesting deal here is, and we'll get back to Wieskamp maybe in a minute, Greg Brown III, who was a huge recruit out of high school, went to Texas, and frankly, Coop should not have gone pro when he did. But I think in terms of raw talent, there's something there with this guy. It just hasn't necessarily come to fruition up to this point.
Greg Brown is an absolute freak of an athlete. Obviously, I watched him a lot at Texas, being a follower of that program. And by the end of his tenure at Texas, I mean, he fell out with Shaka Smart. He was in the doghouse. He was coming off the bench and hardly playing. So Greg Brown was just not someone that Shaka Smart relied on there. And in his first 2 years in Portland, he really hasn't been used. I believe he was a second-round pick. Like you said, he probably shouldn't have come out. Maybe should have entered the transfer portal and gone elsewhere. But Brown's so far in his NBA career hasn't really done much, just 4 points, 2.5 rebounds, 42% from the field and less than 30% from three. But the athleticism does stand out. I mean, he does have NBA athleticism. Man can jump out of the gym. He's 6'8", 206 as well. So he's someone that I think the Mavs would take a look at as far as a development project because he does have that athleticism.
Yeah, and look, we talked about this yesterday, Coop. You have one two-way spot open, potentially two if A.J. Lawson gets promoted to the active roster, and he could have a chance to compete for a two-way spot because he is a former draft pick. He does have talent. He's bouncy as hell, like you mentioned. Like I remember early on at Texas,
he's throwing down windmills
in the open court. I mean, he was just a freak on the fast break and could absolutely throw down some tomahawks. But I think the overall skill of the game is still needs some further development. So maybe getting him some consistent G League minutes, and who knows, maybe something down the road he turns into something. I will say this, he plays a position that the Mavs could use more depth at, that four spot. And you never know. I mean, as a two-way type of guy or even someone you stash in Frisco who potentially gets elevated to a two-way at some point, I think there could be something here. I don't have huge expectations, but there is something in this kid to potentially have a chance to make it.
Like a guy we're going to talk about later in the show, the problem is all up here. It's in the head. He's got to figure it out there. And
you guys can guess who we're going to talk about.
And he just has to commit himself to the game because thus far in his basketball career, it doesn't feel like that's been the case.
Yeah, maybe coming back to the state of Texas, closer to where he played college, a little familiar scene could help him out. Now, who makes this team? And we'll include two-way contracts. If you think Joe Wieskamp's going to make it, type W. If you think Greg Brown will make it, type B. If you think neither will, type N for neither. I think there's a chance Brown makes it on a two-way, but at this point in time, it's going to come down to competition. So let us know what you guys think. And Coop, we talked about Dexter Dennis yesterday, the Wichita State, Texas A&M college player who signed to a camp deal as well. So it's very possible these three guys are competing for one two-way spot as we get closer to training camp.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, I think they have room for one or two more camp deals because I think you can have up to 20 on the roster. So they could sign a couple more guys as well that can compete for that spot.
And, of course, if that happens, if more deals are signed, we will cover it here on Dallas Mavericks Today. Authentic news, rumors, every single storyline that's dropping around this team, Coop and I are covering it here on Dallas Mavericks Today. So hit that subscribe button, regardless if it's big news or small news like signing Joe Wieskamp and Greg Brown. We're going to hit you guys with a video. So we transition from those two signings to the latest on Christian Wood. He remains unsigned in NBA free agency. There's been some report that the Lakers have had some interest. Dallas would still like to negotiate a sign and trade with the team potentially, which of course they would, because they'd like to get something in return for Christian Wood. But well into the month of August now, Coop, and kind of at a standstill. He's kind of in that category of free agents with the guys like Kelly Oubre, P.J. Washington, who I think are still kind of waiting for more dominoes to fall with guys like Damian Lillard and potentially James Harden.
I think at this point, we have to face the fact that Wood's a minimum player, and the Mavericks aren't going to get anything back from him, and I think Wood isn't going to get the contract that he's desiring. Now, this is interesting from Dan Wojcicki of the LA Times, who basically said that Wood's looking for something higher than the league minimum, but his market isn't there. No one's going to give him that. So at this point in time, it sounds like Wood's going to have to sign that minimum contract, and if he does that the Lakers are the number one option, and I actually think that makes sense for both the Lakers and Wood to sign him there.
Yeah, we have a Lakers channel here at Chat Sports, and we talked about this. I think for Christian Wood, he's just going to have to put the ego to the side,
no doubt,
and sign a minimum deal somewhere, unless some kind of sign and trade does occur where there's several moving parts. I don't think a team out there will sign him just in a straight-up contract to more than the vet minimum. It would have to be involved in some kind of huge trade. I mean, there's been all kinds of rumors where maybe the Mavs are a third team in a Clint Capella trade. Maybe in that scenario, Clint Capella gets moved and makes, $4 or $5 million instead of the league minimum. But if he thinks he's going to get $10, $12 million,
it's just not happening, man.
It's just not going to happen. So a team like the Lakers makes sense, Coop, because they need more front court depth, and he'd actually play there, and he could maybe reset his image a little bit, something he was not able to deliver on here in Dallas.
Yeah, as far as the contenders go, I think the Lakers are really the only option for him. He could rebuild his reputation there, and like you said, they're thin at the front court, so they could use a guy who could play 25 to 30 minutes a game and offer the skill set that Wood has, because he does have a unique skill set on offense. He's a guy who can go get a bucket for you as a 6'10 scorer, but the problem, again, lies up here, lies in the defense, and lies in the overall effort in which he plays with. So I'm not sure if the Lakers are wanting to bring in a guy like that, but if it's for a no-risk minimum contract, I think they'd have some interest.
And from the Mavericks standpoint, it really is unfortunate, because for his talent, if you knew you could bring him back for a vet minimum deal or even a few $million to finish out that MLE, like, you would think that would be a great offer, but that ship has clearly sailed. I mean, it's unfortunate, but he's got to own his part in that and try and figure out what the best situation is. The Mavs hopeful, like Mark Stein says, that a sign and trade could be out there, but at this point that nothing has come to fruition on that front.
And I wonder what he thinks about rejecting the extension that the Mavs reportedly offered him early in the season for 2 years, and I think somewhere around $34 million at $17 million a season. I mean, it happens, obviously. Look, the Mavs have
Deja vu, Nerlens Noel.
I was going to say, Mavs have gotten lucky with some contracts with Nerlens Noel in the past, and they've gotten very unlucky with some contracts like Chandler Parsons and Wes Matthews, so I guess it all evens out.
Yeah, so we'll continue to monitor Christian Wood's status and where he might end up, whether he signs elsewhere or gets moved in a sign trade, whatever, we'll have it covered. And you guys predict it for us. Where will Christian Wood play next season? It won't be Dallas, because
it will not be Dallas.
I think that ship has, unless I hate to even throw something out there, unless one of your bigs tears his ACL at a workout, that would be the only scenario where that opens up. Yeah, knock on wood. We don't not Christian Wood, but knock on wood that does not happen. I think the Lakers or the Heat, Coop. Those are the two teams that stand out to me. If the Heat trade for Dame, they're going to have to fill out that roster. I think of that minimum deal there could make sense.
Yeah, the Heat could be an option, and maybe that's kind of what they're waiting on to see what happens with the Dame deal and how their roster shakes out. I could see him with the Heat as well.
Yeah, be interesting to see. And maybe, who knows, maybe the Mavs somehow get involved in the Dame Heat trade as a third team, and they move Christian Wood and maybe get a second-round pick back or something. Who the hell knows? All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's episode of Mavericks Today. The latest on Christian Wood, also the Mavs signing Joe Wieskamp and Greg Brown. If more news drops, we will have you guys covered.
See you guys.
And we'll be back later this week with another video.